That night, Port Angeles was swallowed by rain. Wind from the Strait of Juan de Fuca battered the windows, spraying cold salt water against the glass. I had just turned off the lamp and reached for my lavender tea, my quiet ritual, when I heard it. A knock. Urgent, heavy, desperate. 30 years in law enforcement had taught me one thing. No one knocks on a door at 1 a.m. unless something's gone terribly wrong. I stood up, every old instinct snapping awake beneath my skin. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice rough with sleep and age. No answer. Then, a trembling voice through the rain. "Mom, please, open the door." My hand froze on the handle. I opened it, and my daughter, Sarah, collapsed into my arms like someone climbing out of the deep. The yellow porch light fell across her face, split lip, dried blood at the corner of her mouth, one eye swollen shut. Her whole body shook, not from cold, but from fear. She clutched her stomach, and I knew instantly this wasn't a small injury. "Sarah!" "What happened?" she gasped between sobs. "Robert hit me because of her." I stood motionless under the rain, listening to the storm lash the porch. In that second, every case file, every bruise victim I'd ever documented came flooding back. Except this time, the victim was my own child. I pulled her inside, wrapped her in the thick wool blanket from the couch. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Every tear seemed to tighten her chest. I brought out the first aid kit, cleaning the blood from her mouth. "Did he break anything?" I asked, trying to sound steady. Sarah shook her head, but when I lifted her shirt, my breath caught. A bruise the size of a dinner plate stretched from her ribs down to her hip. Dear God, Sarah. My hands trembled as I pressed the gauze. I'd seen pain before, but never one that cut this deep, not in the flesh, but in the heart. Her phone lit up on the table, Robert's name, flashing again and again. Then a message appeared. "Open your mouth if you want to lose everything." The sound in my head wasn't thunder, it was rage. I reached for the phone, but Sarah grabbed it back, terrified. "Don't, Mom!" "Please don't read anymore." Her eyes were wide with panic, the kind that comes from someone who's lived too long in fear. I sat beside her, held her hand tight. "It's all right," I whispered. "You're safe now." But deep down, I knew nothing about tonight was safe. Not anymore. I called a taxi. My car was in the shop, and I wasn't waiting. While we sat there in silence, Sarah murmured, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't know where else to go. I just thought, you'd know what to do. I nodded, rain and tears blending together. You did exactly the right thing. When the cab arrived, I helped her outside. Rain stung our faces. She leaned on me, trembling. Every step made her wince. On the ride to the hospital, she spoke softly, as if to herself. "He changed, Mom, after she came along." He said I was a burden. I didn't answer. I watched the streetlights blur through the wet glass and swore silently. He's about to learn what a real burden feels like. The weight of the law. St. Joseph Hospital glowed through the rain, a white beacon on the slick pavement. Dr. Leticia Figueroa, my old colleague from the force, was on duty. One look at Sarah and she waved her straight into the trauma room, no questions asked. I walked beside them, holding back everything boiling inside me. When they lifted Sarah's coat, I saw it all. Bruises across her shoulder, red welts on her wrists, scratches on the back of her neck. I turned to Leticia. "Document everything, every mark, every location." She met my eyes. "I will. Make sure it's in the report," I said. "I'll need a copy." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was back on the battlefield. Not with a gun, but with the truth. Sarah lay still, the sedative finally easing her breathing. I stood by her bed, watching the white hospital light fall across her face, and felt something old awaken inside me. Something I'd buried with my badge. The instinct to fight for justice. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my old contacts until I found the name. James Ellison, attorney. When he answered, I skipped the small talk. "James," I said, my voice cold, deliberate. "Start preparing a case. I'll send you the first piece of evidence by morning." He hesitated. "Maggie, are you sure?" "Absolutely." I hung up and looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Outside, the rain still fell, but inside me, a fire had started. From that moment on, I knew I wouldn't stop until justice stood beside my daughter. And that night, that sound of rain and knocking was where the battle for truth began. St. Joseph Hospital sat on a hill overlooking the sea. When the taxi stopped beneath the red emergency sign, the rain hadn't yet decided to end. Its lights reflected off the slick pavement like cold, shining blades. I helped Sarah out of the car. Every step she took came with a muffled groan. Her coat hung heavy with rain, and the mix of blood and seawater carried that bitter, metallic smell that no soap can ever wash away. The emergency corridor was nearly empty. The air reeked of disinfectant. Digital clocks blinked across the walls. Automatic doors opened and closed without a sound. I sat Sarah on a metal bench, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the registration desk as if this were all just another routine procedure. But my hands were shaking, and inside me, silence began to crack. A young nurse recognized me. She guided us to an exam room. White light flared overhead, flooding Sarah's face. Split lip, bruised cheek, purple streaks along her shoulder and wrists. I heard the familiar noises, the pen scratching, latex gloves stretching, the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. None of it was new to me, yet for the first time in my life, I wanted to scream. Then Dr. Letitia Figueroa entered, her white coat damp from the rain. We'd worked a case together years ago. She didn't ask, didn't speak. She looked at me once, and that was enough. Sarah was laid on the gurney, the blanket pulled to her chin, blood-stained gauze piled up in the tray beside her. I stood in the corner, hands clasped so tight my knuckles whitened. Every time the nurse lifted a sleeve or rolled her to one side, every new bruise felt like something snapping inside me. I counted with the rhythm of the monitor, not to calm myself, but to record. Admission time, 1:47 a.m. Injuries, left rib cage, shoulder, wrists, mouth. Color of bruising, deep purple, not yet yellowing. Preliminary diagnosis, multiple soft tissue trauma. Each detail carved itself into memory. Every number, every second. I knew they'd become the first timestamps of truth. After the x-rays, Leticia came over with a thick folder. She placed it on the desk, her voice low and steady. No fractures. No internal bleeding, but significant contusions from direct impact. She needs to stay at least 24 hours for observation. I nodded, signed the admission papers, and requested a duplicate report. No explanation needed. She already knew why. While Sarah rested under IV fluids, I pulled a chair beside her. Her eyelids fluttered with exhaustion. Her breathing was heavy. I held her cold, narrow hand, bones sharp beneath the skin. How long had she been living like this, wrapped in fear until her body forgot how to be safe? I inhaled deeply, and in the back of my mind I heard George's voice, my late husband, a man of discipline and structure. Don't react with anger. Act with structure. I looked around the room, the overhead lamp, the window, the security camera in the corner. Everything could become evidence. I took my phone and began photographing. The clock, the bruises, the hospital tags, frame by frame, each image numbered, time-stamped, saved under one chain. Case_Sarah_01. When Letitia left, I took the small white USB from my coat and plugged it into my laptop. The first folder I created was labeled Evidence_A, Medical_Record. I copied every scan, every image, every report, and time-stamped each file. Every click matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. When the loading bar reached 100%, a new icon appeared on my screen. That tiny symbol meant I had just crossed the line, from mother to investigator. Outside, the rain had stopped. Dawn bled faintly through the blinds. I stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall with a paper cup of bitter coffee. Across from me, an older woman waited for her husband's test results. Her hands clutched her purse, knuckles pale. I realized everyone who sat in this hallway shared the same wound, all betrayed by someone they once trusted. Back in the room, Sarah slept curled on her side, as if protecting herself from invisible hands. Under the bandage on her neck, a faint bruise peeked through. I noted it down in my old field notebook. Possible strangulation marks, no clear handprint yet. UV light required for confirmation. The handwriting was steady, firm. I'd filled hundreds of injury reports in my life, but this was the first one written for my own blood. 2:58 a.m. I switched on my old voice recorder. Initial report. Victim, Sarah Arriaga, age 31. Condition, multiple soft tissue injuries, contusions on abdomen and wrist. Location, St. Joseph Medical Center, Port Angeles. Admission time, 1:47 a.m. Current evidence, medical report, injury photographs, time-stamped wall clock. No emotion, only structure, because structure is what stands when emotion collapses. 3:10 a.m. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I didn't answer. A text followed. Stop this before you regret it. No name, no signature. I took a screenshot and filed it under threats. No words wasted, no fear shown. Letitia returned with a sealed envelope of photos, the official injury documentation. She set them on the table and said only one sentence. I've signed off on the report. Keep it safe. I nodded. No thank yous, just the silent understanding between two women who knew that silence could kill. I gathered everything, reports, images, copies, into a single evidence folder. Each sheet numbered, stacked, labeled. Evidence 1, medical. 4:05 a.m. Outside, the fog rolled in from the sea, blurring the glass into ghostly shapes. I watched it and knew. This wasn't a domestic dispute anymore. It was a criminal case, and the first of my life that I could not afford to lose. By the time I left the hospital, it was nearly dawn. No one spoke. Only my footsteps echoed down the corridor, mingling with the howl of the wind through the doorframe. The taxi followed the coastal road home. Fog swallowed the horizon, but my direction was clear. Straight ahead, no turning back. In my coat pocket, the white USB felt warm in my hand, small, but heavy with beginnings. At home, I didn't turn on the lights. The room still carried the chill of last night. I laid the files on my desk, wiped the rain off the cover, and watched dawn spill through the blinds. It fell across the old wooden board where my police badge once hung. The badge was just a keepsake now. But the oath behind it had come back to life. Start with evidence. Let the truth speak. I opened my notebook and wrote the first line. March 6th, 2025. 1 a.m. Sarah arrived at my door, severely assaulted. 1:47 a.m. Admitted to St. Joseph Hospital. First evidence secured. Primary suspect, Robert Mendez. Full stop. I closed the notebook and placed my hand on the cover. Something stirred inside me. Not grief, but a cold, focused awakening. At 57, I thought I'd buried the instincts of a detective for good. I was wrong. They hadn't died, they'd only been sleeping. And tonight, as my daughter lay beneath the sterile light of a hospital room, those instincts woke again. I looked out the window. The sea was calm. Morning light spread across the silver water like a mirror. I saw my reflection, older, colder, but steadier than ever. There was no room left for silence, no room for fear. From here on, there would only be the structure of truth. Morning came with the sea still wrapped in fog. Over Port Angeles, the light was silver, thin, hesitant, like the town itself hadn't yet decided to wake. The hill roads were slick, the first cars of the day leaving watery tracks behind them. I drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the leather folder that held Sarah's medical records. Photographs of her bruises, doctor. Figueroa's signed report, and the images I'd taken that night. The first evidence. A small, solid piece of the structure of truth. I turned onto the quiet street where Mrs. Camilla Vega lived. She'd been my neighbor for years, the kind of woman who didn't install security cameras out of fear, but out of discipline. At 68, she still rose before dawn, brewed a black coffee, checked the weather, and backed up her hard drives once a week. I knew that because I'd helped her set up the system myself. The grass on her porch glistened with dew. Lavender bent east in the wind. When I rang the bell, the smell of coffee drifted out with the warmth of the kitchen. Camilla opened the door, wrapped in her old gray sweater. Her eyes widened a little when she saw me, but she didn't ask. We went straight to her desk, where her monitors displayed last night's footage, the timeline blinking between 00 to 0300. I leaned closer. Rain streaked across the lens, the image trembling in the wind. Then, at 1:02 a.m., Sarah appeared, running, staggering, one arm clutching her stomach, stumbling through puddles. Headlights flared behind her, a black SUV. It stopped at the mouth of the alley. The driver didn't step out. He only switched the lights to high beam, illuminating my daughter like prey in the rain. My skin went cold. Sarah vanished out of frame. The vehicle reversed, then turned away. A streak of light across the screen. Gone. I paused the footage, zoomed in. 4 faint characters glimmered on the license plate. 6FZ9. I took a screenshot and saved it to the white USB in my coat pocket. No need to confirm. I'd stared at that Ford Expedition in front of Sarah's house for years. I plugged the drive into my laptop and created a new folder. Case_Sarah_02, Evidence B, surveillance footage. Files labeled precisely 01:02:01, arrival. 01:02:16, door knock. 01:02:30, vehicle departure. I checked the metadata, time, date, GPS coordinates, all matching perfectly. A closed, verified chain of time. Then I printed 3 stills, signed each in the lower corner, and stamped the hour beside my name. Every sheet felt heavy, like a cut through memory. I used to do this for strangers. Now, I did it for my own daughter. I drove down to the small cafe by the harbor. Commander Rosales was already there, sitting in the back, his broad shoulders turned toward the window. I placed 2 photographs on the table. He looked, frowning slightly. Outside, fog drifted over the seawall. Waves thudded against the pier. He was watching her, I said quietly, from the night before. Rosales didn't answer. He simply pulled a notepad from his coat and wrote down the 4 digits. We didn't need more words. As I rose to leave, he murmured the same warning I'd once given him years ago. Remember, Maggie, once you start collecting, there's no way back. I nodded. He was right. There'd been no way back since the moment I opened my door at 1 a.m. Back home, I set the USB on the desk and opened the footage again. Blue light from the screen washed across my face, cold and metallic. Frame by frame, I examined the video. And there, barely visible through the rain, was someone else in the passenger seat. Long hair, pale in the headlights. A woman, not Sarah. I adjusted the brightness, the contrast. The face sharpened. Young, composed, eyes staring straight into the camera. I remembered. Denise Salgado, an employee from Robert's pawn shop. The one Sarah had mentioned over dinner months ago, her voice trembling just slightly. Even then, I'd recognized the look in my daughter's eyes. A look every woman learns to identify sooner or later. The shape of betrayal. I isolated the frame and saved it separately. Evidence under C, Passenger 01. Just 3 images, 1 name, 1 timestamp. It was enough. Violence rarely stands alone. It's only ever the visible tip of a larger system. Deceit, control, manipulation. I printed the still, clipped it to the file, and wrote beneath her photo, possible accomplice, motive, control, and property. The room was silent, 3:15 p.m. The light outside had turned gold. I leaned back, staring at the neat lines of paper on my desk. Each sheet a pulse of justice, small, cold, and precise. That evening, my phone rang. An unlisted number. A man's voice, low, muffled as if through fabric. No greeting, no name. Stop, Maggie. Some things are meant to stay buried. I said nothing, just quietly pressed record. You know what happens when you dig too deep. She'll lose everything if you keep this up. Then the line went dead. I replayed it. The calm tone, the steady breath, the heartbeat beneath the words. I saved the audio under evidence_D, threat_call, 03:24 p.m. Another thread added to the structure. But I felt no fear, only clarity. Every threat is an admission. Criminals speak before they disappear. By nightfall, only the desk lamp remained lit. I organized the case files in order. 10100 a.m. Sarah arrived at my door. 20147 a.m. Hospital admission plus medical report. 3:0102 a.m. Neighbor's camera captured suspect's vehicle. 4:0324 p.m. Anonymous threat call. A closed sequence, logical, unbroken. Truth has structure. I'd taught that line to a dozen rookie officers. Now I was proving it. Not in a briefing room, but in my own kitchen. With a red pen, I wrote across the folder's cover, Phase 1, Collection Complete. The white USB lay beside a cold cup of tea. Under the lamp's yellow light, it glimmered like a bullet. Small, metallic, final. I touched it lightly, the chill running down my fingertips. Inside it lived fear, silence, and the evidence of one long night. I opened my notebook and wrote, March 7th, 2025. Image and audio evidence secured. Suspect, Robert Mendez. Possible accomplice, Denise Salgado. Next objective, verify property transactions and power of attorney signatures. Then I folded the notebook shut and blew out the candle. Outside, the sea sighed against the rocks. Wind pressed through the cracks of the old wooden house. The breath of someone still hiding. I leaned back in my chair. On the wall behind me hung framed photos from my years on the force, back when everything still seemed black and white. Now it wasn't. Only one truth remained. Silence doesn't feed justice. Rain began again over Port Angeles. I turned toward the window. For a brief second, lightning flared, and the sea lit up like molten silver. In that flash, I saw my reflection. Older, yes, but fully awake. The storm would wash away the tracks outside, but not the evidence I had already stored inside the system. The second chain of proof was complete. The structure of truth was alive, and this time, I would follow it to the end. The third morning in Port Angeles was colder than usual. Fog lay so thick you couldn't see the tip of the lighthouse. I sat in the kitchen with a cold cup of tea and files spread across the table, white pages threaded with black and white prints. Sarah's swollen face, the black SUV, the woman in the passenger seat, Denise Salgado. Each sheet was a slice of truth. Stacked together, they formed a map of the crime. I began the morning the way I used to in my last years on the force. Plan the day, tier the targets, number the priorities. Priority 1. Verify Sarah's bank accounts and property ownership. Priority 2. Define Denise's role. Priority 3. Make Robert believe I'm still just a harmless, aging mother. Before sunrise, I booted the laptop, slotted in the USB, and copied the evidence into an encrypted drive. Transfer complete blinked back silent as a gavel. Under each file, I logged time, place, witness, certifying party. The case structure was taking shape. In my system, there was no room for emotion. By mid-morning, I stopped at Attorney James Ellison's office. Glass door, hiss of wind, the smell of fresh paper and ink. He was at the stacks with the binder in hand. A brief nod, no explanations needed. I set a large envelope on his desk, medical records, injury photos, the camera footage. He read slowly. His expression shifted from polite detachment to fixed attention. I pushed across one last page, a still of Denise's face. No comment, just silence, the kind you hear in court before a verdict. As I left, he said only, "If you plan to go further, make everything lawful." No case is won on anger alone. I nodded. I didn't plan to win on anger. I planned to win on structure. At noon, I drove to the harbor. Salt and gas fumes blew off the docks. I needed a quiet place to sort the data. Laptop on the passenger seat, files open wide, sunlight flashing off the screen like the old interrogation room lights. I opened financial. Numbers rolled. Money had been siphoned from Sarah and Robert's joint account for 6 straight months. Withdrawals of about $4,000 each time, routed to the same sub-account under the name D. Salgado. I noted, possible embezzlement via joint account, 6 months, total $24,000. This wasn't only violence. It was deliberate theft. I saved the file, encrypted it, and cloned it to a second USB Ellison's copy. Financial evidence is the spine of every case. Feelings can be argued. Numbers cannot. By late afternoon, I ducked into the local grocery for a few things. If you want to vanish, stand in a crowd. At the checkout, a tall man in a black leather jacket waited ahead of me. So familiar, I held my breath. Robert. He didn't see me. On the phone, voice clipped, holding a bag of liquor and cigarettes. I watched the shake in his hand as he dialed, the way he scanned the room as if someone might be watching. All the signs of a man who knows he's been found out. I kept my head low and slid my phone to record, not to take a picture. His voice threaded through the beep of barcode scanners and the soft whoosh of the automatic doors. "No, she won't. She's old, weak. I'll handle it." I didn't stop moving. I walked past at a normal pace, heart steady. In my pocket, the red light on the recorder blinked. A new audio file. Back home, I arrayed everything on the desk. USBs, files, audio, stills. Under each stack, I wrote in red, Phase 2, Preparation. I knew what was coming wouldn't be simple. No badge, no authority. But I had evidence and discipline. I typed a clean event summary, every line tight. 1 a.m., victim fled suspect's residence. 01:47 a.m., medical records confirm assault. 1:02 a.m., neighbor's camera captures suspect vehicle stalking. 3:24 p.m., anonymous threat call. 9:10 a.m. today, discovery of unauthorized withdrawals. Everything meshed like clockwork gears. I stared at the list, feeling my pulse align with each line. Every step, every detail, part of the counterattack. Late evening, a text from Rosales. Plate confirmed. Vehicle registered to Denise Salgado, not Robert. I wasn't surprised. Men who live in the dark learn camouflage. He wasn't stupid, just too sure of the woman beside him. I reopened the photo and studied Denise's face. Young, cold, eyes emptied out. I've seen that look on people who witness crimes and choose to stand still. Complicity doesn't always act. Sometimes it just refuses to move. Night fell. Quiet house. I switched on the small lamp. Its light washed the wall where George's photo hangs. I read my last note again. Do not call the police yet. Wait until evidence is complete. He will come back. One rule from the job. Abusers return to the ground they think they control. Robert would be no exception. He'd come back, not for Sarah, but for control. When he did, I'd be ready. I mounted a mini camera under the eave, pointed straight at the front door. Inside, I hid another on the bookshelf, aimed at the entry. Both wired to a standalone hard drive, no network, everything local, nothing erasable. I finished near midnight. Sea fog rolled in and blurred the world outside. I killed the lights and watched through the curtains. The little street lay empty, street lamps glinting on shallow puddles. Somewhere out there he was watching, like always. When the clock struck 12, I wrote the day's final line. Preparation complete. The predator is about to meet someone who trained hunters. I closed the notebook, ejected the drive, shut the lid. In the dark, a tiny green LED on the camera pulsed steady, precise, emotionless, exactly like my heartbeat. I walked the hall and paused at Sarah's door. She slept, her face finally soft in the dim. I drew the blanket up and closed the door gently. Outside, wind lifted through the trees. The sea sent back its low, even drum, reminding me that truth doesn't sleep. The evidence was in hand, the timeline was sealed, and tonight, the counterattack began. That day, Port Angeles was unnervingly still. The sea lay flat as glass, the silver light drifting slow across the surface. But inside me, something was stretched tight like a string about to snap. Sarah slept most of the day, exhausted from nightmares. I didn't wake her. Everything was ready. Cameras in the house, sensors under the eaves, the encrypted drive hidden in the drawer beneath my desk. Every door, every dark corner had eyes. I was no longer the fragile mother people saw. I was once again the officer who knew how to watch, how to record, how to wait. That afternoon, I sat in my study, 4 camera feeds glowing on the screen front door, porch, hallway, driveway. Everything looked calm. I sipped black coffee, slow and steady, forcing my heartbeat to match the rhythm of the clock. The wind from the strait brought salt through the cracked window. In a wooden house, every small sound becomes a message. The tick of the clock, the hiss of the pipes, the soft tread of the neighbor's cat. I knew he'd return. Men like Robert always do. They thrive on control. They don't retreat. They regroup. I'd caught men like him before. They always come back. The moment they think the victim has stopped fighting, the moment they believe no one is watching. When dust settled, I turned off the lights and left only the faint glow from the laptop. The clock read 8:47 p.m. Sarah was safe at Camila Vega's house, under quiet police watch. I stayed home, alone waiting. Wind rose. The night stretched long. On the monitor, nothing moved, until a white flare appeared at the corner of camera 3. Headlights. I zoomed in. A black SUV idled about 50 yards from the house. The engine stayed on. He didn't get out right away. The interior light flickered, then went dark. A shadow moved near the car. My hand stayed on the keyboard, my pulse hammering but steady. 2 minutes. 5. 9. Then the figure emerged, tall, hooded, dark jacket. That walk, I knew it by heart. Robert Mendez. He approached the fence slowly, head down, scanning both sides. In his hand, something rectangular, a letter maybe. I switched to the porch camera, zoomed tighter. The street light caught it, white paper, thick black lettering. He slid it through the crack of the door, then stepped back. For one long second, he looked straight at the window, right into the camera lens. No smile, no words, just that stare. Then he turned and left. I didn't move until his engine faded into the wind. Outside, the air was knife cold. The envelope lay half soaked on the porch. I slipped on gloves and carried it inside. Inside, one sheet, scrawled in thick marker. You touch me, your daughter won't be safe. The handwriting was heavy, slanted, pressed deep. I felt no fear, only the chill of clarity. A threat is still data. A signature is a pattern. I photographed it, sealed it in a plastic evidence pouch, and labeled Evidence_E Threat Note, 9:32 p.m. Everything according to plan. I didn't sleep. I watched the monitors until dawn. At 2:15 a.m., movement again. No headlights this time, just a shadow gliding along the fence line. He'd come back, on foot. The figure moved toward the rear of the house by the living room window, where Sarah once read at night. I didn't speak, didn't move. The cameras caught it cleanly. He opened his jacket, pulled something metallic, a key. The door handle rattled, metal scraped. He had a copy of the house key. I hit record. Every second, every frame. When he crouched, the light caught another object on his belt, a folding knife. No hesitation now. I pressed the alert switch for Rosales. A small red light blinked on my screen. Patrol units had already been stationed within 300 meters. I cut the lights and slipped behind the hallway door, watching through the curtain gap. Robert had just nudged the door open when a blinding beam of headlights swept across the yard. A sharp shout split the night. "Police! Hands up!" He slammed the door, bolting toward the back fence. Then came the chaos boots, pounding, metal clashing, the short crack of orders. It was over in 30 seconds. When silence fell again, the only light came from the patrol car strobes, blue and red, flashing against the rain-soaked glass. I stepped onto the porch. They had him pinned at the end of the driveway. Mud streaked his clothes. His face hung low. Blood on his hands, maybe from forcing the lock. The knife still gleamed in an officer's glove. Rosales caught my eye. No words, just one firm nod. I nodded back. After they took him away, I stood in the driveway. The flashing lights reflected in puddles like fire underwater. I didn't feel relief, only emptiness. This arrest wasn't the end. It was the opening of another truth. When the last siren faded, I went back inside and replayed the footage. Every second was intact, from headlights to handcuffs. Audio clear enough to hear his breath. I saved the file under Evidence F, Attempted Entry and Arrest, then marked the master folder, Phase 3, Exposure. Before dawn, I sat in the living room with a blanket around my legs, watching the video loop again and again. Rain tapped the windows. Waves beat against the rocks. On screen, Robert's body hit the ground. The cuffs clicked shut. I knew this recording wouldn't just save Sarah. It would save others, the women still trapped in silence. I turned toward the family photo on the table. George in uniform, Sarah as a child, laughing beside the old dog. I placed my hand on the frame and whispered, "I did it right." The structure of truth is in motion. By morning, the official report had reached Ellison's office and the prosecutor's desk. Charges: illegal entry, credible threat, attempted assault. But I knew Robert wasn't finished. Men like him never are. He'd strike back, through lawyers, through lies, through the court of public opinion. I closed the laptop and looked out at the bay. The first sunlight of the day broke through the fog, spilling gold over the water. I inhaled deeply. There was no scent of victory, only salt and iron, the smell of truth just beginning. The morning after the arrest, Port Angeles gleamed as if the storm had never come. But inside me, the wind hadn't passed. It stayed, metallic and cold, humming with unfinished business. I brewed a cup of black tea and sat in the bright kitchen. Files spread across the table, USBs labeled and locked in a small metal box. Sarah was still asleep at Camilla's, safe for now. I promised myself she would never have to see violence again. But I also knew men like Robert aren't defeated by handcuffs. They live on money, and they always strike back with it. As I sorted the case files, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen, Romero Alcazar, from the Land Registry Department. We'd worked together years ago on property fraud investigations. His voice came low, hoarse, cautious. "There's something strange in your property file. You should come." Soon, I grabbed my keys. Outside, sunlight broke across the lake like shattered glass. I drove off, already running through the worst possibilities. The registry office stood by the harbor, a weathered building with salt-stained windows. My heels echoed on the tile as I walked down the hallway. Romero waited at his desk, his face tight. He said nothing, just slid a thick yellow folder across the table, stamped with the city seal. The first page read, "Transfer of ownership, parcel 47A. Below it, my signature. Or rather, a clumsy imitation. The strokes softer, leaning too far right. And beneath that, Sarah's signature, also wrong. The recipient's name, Denise Salgado. Date of signing, 2 weeks ago. I didn't need anyone to explain. Robert hadn't stopped at bruises and threats. He'd tried to take everything. Our family's land, the only property still in Sarah's and my name, passed down from my father. Romero's eyes flicked up, full of apology. I nodded. Words weren't necessary. The evidence was right there. Fake notarizations, forged signatures, and somewhere between them a chain of bribed officials. I requested certified copies and left in silence. Outside, the sky darkened over the sea. The air turned heavy, smelling of rain. I wasn't angry, just hollow. Like I'd been expecting this all along. Men like Robert always prepare their escape route. When violence fails, they move to theft. In the car, I opened my laptop, plugged in the USB, and scanned every page of the file. I stored it under Evidence G, Fraudulent Deed Transfer, each image labeled, time-stamped. In the notes, I typed, Signature forged, Beneficiary Denise Salgado, Possible internal accomplice at Registry Office. Then I encrypted the folder and called James Ellison. He promised to prepare a formal complaint, forgery and fraudulent transfer. He'd need handwriting comparisons and Romero's statement. I listened, but my mind had already gone elsewhere, picturing Denise. The woman in the SUV. The woman who'd signed away my father's land with the same hands that once handed Robert his cigarettes. By afternoon, I stopped by Camilla's to see Sarah. She was sitting on the porch, eyes hollow, hair loosely tied back. She smiled when she saw me, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. I didn't tell her about the forged deeds. She didn't need more fear. I just told her everything was being handled. When she fell asleep, I drove home. Golden light filled the living room, turning the walls the color of honey. I spread the documents across the table. Numbers, signatures, stamps, each detailed too perfect, and perfection, I knew, is the fingerprint of forgery. Next to the papers, I unrolled the map of our properties. Parcel 47A, by the river, less than a mile from my home. My father had planted apple trees there. That orchard was where he'd first taught me to shoot and told me, the real thieves are the ones who look respectable. Robert had touched something sacred, and like my father always said, when someone profanes what's holy, let justice, not anger, answer. I photographed every page with my old field camera. Clean angles, steady light. Each file labeled with time and registry code. I stamped a red note on the front. To James Ellison, for submission. Outside, rain began to fall. Heavy, deliberate. I opened the window. The wind carried in the scent of salt, wet wood, and iron. On the table, I placed 3 things side by side. Photos of Sarah's injuries, the audio file of Robert's threat, the forged property deed. 3 crimes, 3 structures of guilt. I stared at them and realized justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs structure and time. That night, I met Rosales at the old harbor. The wind howled. Waves struck the steel railings like drums. I handed him a folder of copies and a memory card with the footage of Robert's attempted break-in. He nodded. No words exchanged. The case was no longer personal. It was now federal. Driving home, I passed parcel 47A. The field was mud and weeds, but in the dark, I saw a shape by the fence light with long hair. I stopped, flicked on the headlights. The figure turned and hurried down toward the river trail. I didn't need to see her face. I knew it was Denise. Maybe she'd heard Robert was in custody. Maybe she was trying to cover her tracks. I switched on my voice recorder. My voice came calm, flat. March 8th, 2025, 22:14. Spotted female subject, Denise Salgado, near parcel 47A site of forged transfer. Possible filer of false deed. Monitoring continues. I turned the engine off, sat still. The headlights lit the trees. Bare branches curled like broken hands. In that moment, the next step crystallized. Follow Denise. Find the last link. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. I opened the laptop, added a new folder. Phase 4, Fraud. Below it, I typed the final note of the day. Violence is the weapon of the weak. Forgery is the weapon of the desperate. Both end the same way. Truth has structure. Outside, the rain shimmered under the streetlights, stretching into long, wavering lines. In their reflection, I saw myself. A woman who had gone too far to turn back, but who still carried one unbroken purpose. Justice for Sarah. Morning came thick as smoke. Condensation fogged the windows. I sat in the kitchen turning pages, the screen's blue light washing the grain of the table. In my cup, the tea had gone cold. Outside, Port Angeles was so quiet I could hear gulls slide past the roofline. I knew this calm was only the silence before a larger storm. Robert was in holding, but his attorney, Hector Valdivia, had filed a countersuit. He claimed Sarah invented everything, and I, a retired officer, was abusing former authority to persecute a family. I read the pleading, dense, cold lines of type. Those sentences weren't aimed only at me. They were written to erase what Sarah had endured. On local social media, the whispering began. She just wants the land back. Sarah used to blow up at her husband. She's not innocent. There are always 2 sides. I read every comment like I was reading a case file on a crowd. People who used to shake my hand at the market. who smiled at Sarah when she was little, turned away with a few keystrokes. I didn't feel anger, just cold. Truth never wins quickly. It needs structure and time. At noon, a small package arrived with no return address. Brown carton, a crushed corner. I set it on the table, pulled on gloves, and opened it carefully. Inside, a shattered photo frame, glass spidered, and a slip of paper wedged beneath. Stay silent if you don't want to see that again. The handwriting matched the earlier note. I photographed it, sealed it in a clear bag, labeled it Evidence H, Threat Package. No need to guess. Robert had hands working for him, outside people willing to get dirty. I checked the interior cameras, verified the whole system. Everything was recording. I added another layer, basic facial recognition. From now on, anyone who stepped onto the porch would be captured and time-stamped automatically. By afternoon, James Ellison called. Robert had been released on bail. His lawyer had reframed the file, arguing it was a domestic conflict. I listened and said nothing, watching the last light smear across the sea gray, steel cold. When I hung up, a black pickup stopped at the curb. The door opened. Robert stepped out. No cuffs, no escort, just him. Leather jacket, a thin smile, hands in his pockets. I wasn't surprised. Men like him always come back when they think fear has softened the ground. I stood behind the glass and didn't move. He walked slowly, stopped at the gate, said nothing, just looked into the house. No panic in his eyes now, only the challenge of a man who believes money and counsel can bleach anything clean. I didn't open the door. I let the cameras drink in every second, the late sun cutting across his face, the tiny scar near his jawline, the lift at one corner of his mouth, the unblinking stare. After a few minutes, he turned, pushed a letter through the gate, and drove off. I didn't read it immediately. I retrieved the evidence kit, gloved up, opened it. One sheet, the handwriting slightly unsteady. You won once, but I have lawyers and friends. I'll take everything back, including your daughter. I folded it, bagged it, labeled it Evidence_I, Threat Letter Number 2. At the edge, a smear of black ink, likely from his fingers. I swabbed it, sealed the swab separately. Nothing wasted. Every stain, every ridge was one more rivet in the structure of truth. That night, Sarah came home. She didn't know he was out. Seeing me sorting the files, she asked quietly if something was wrong. I told her everything was under control. But the look in her eyes, the fear she tried to hide, told me our peace was temporary. Dark fell fast. The wind picked up. I switched on the porch light and returned to the desk, reviewing camera feeds. At 9:27 p.m., a figure flashed on the rear cam, slender, long hair under a knit cap. Denise. She slipped to the gate, scanned the yard, and tossed something white over the fence. A plain envelope. Then left. I scrubbed the footage frame by frame, caught her plate. The same car she drove to Robert's pawn shop. I printed the stills and clipped them to the file. Outside, I collected the envelope. Inside was a single bank confirmation. Account name, Denise Salgado. Sender, Robert Mendez. Total deposits, $24,000. Dripped across 6 months. No threat, no note, just numbers. I understood. Denise was starting to fear for herself, offering a way out or marking her distance. I saved the original, scanned it, labeled it Evidence J-Bank Transfer Proof. Near midnight, an engine rolled up. Through the window, I saw the black SUV settle opposite the house. Lights off. The air went colder. I killed the interior lamps and let the cameras work. Minutes bled by 5, 10. Then the ping of metal on glass. A small stone skittered across the floor, taped to it, a scrap of paper scrawled in haste. Don't go outside. Someone's watching him.
Different handwriting, softer, leaning left. Denise. She was signaling. Maybe she knew what Robert was about to try. I bagged the note for evidence. On my laptop, I tapped into the street cameras, the same network I'd helped install years ago. Another car had ghosted in behind the SUV. Lights off, unfamiliar plates. The driver stepped out, photographed Robert's vehicle, and vanished. Not police, not press. Someone was hunting him, which meant the fight had spilled beyond any family line. By first light, I'd sorted the files into moisture-proof sleeves and locked them in the safe. The wind screamed over the roof. On the monitor, the last frame held Robert at the gate face tight, eyes empty. I opened my logbook and wrote, March 9th, 2025. Suspect Robert Mendez released on bail. Continued threats letters and package. Denise Salgado shows signs of breaking away. Status, elevated risk. Plan, protect Sarah. Finalize prosecutor's packet. I closed the book and leaned back. Dawn slid through the blinds, striping the desk stacks of files, sealed bags, labeled USBs, a complete architecture for a war between justice and deceit. I shut my eyes and listened to the sea wind push through the house, the surf beating like a slow heart against the shore. Behind my lids, I saw Robert's face, smiling, then gone. The next round wouldn't be fought in the dark. It would be held under courtroom lights, where liars have nowhere left to hide. 3 days after Robert made bail, Port Angeles no longer felt calm. Headlines spread across social media like wildfire. Former police chief manipulates records to frame son-in-law. Wife recants her testimony. I read them without blinking. The smear campaign had begun. It's always the next step for men like him. When they can't win legally, they go for your name. Old photos of me resurfaced. Me briefing a task force, leading a suspect in handcuffs. Each image cropped, captioned, twisted, used as evidence of my supposed abuse of power. Hundreds of comments followed, some cruel, some doubtful, some pitying. None knew the truth. I'd seen this pattern my whole career. When a woman stands up to a man with power, the crowd always sides with whoever speaks louder. I stayed silent. Emotional reaction only feeds the narrative. Instead, I archived everything. Every post, timestamp, username. Digital footprints tell their own story. Even smear campaigns have structure. That afternoon, I drove to St. Agnes Church, where my mother once volunteered. I needed air, space, quiet. The place smelled of wax and cedar. Light filtered through stained glass in waves of gold and blue, beautiful and cold. I sat in the back pew, listening to the organ hum in the distance, until a hand rested gently on my shoulder. Camilla Vega, my elderly neighbor, the one whose security camera had captured Sarah's escape that night. She held out a small USB wrapped in cloth. "You'll want this," she whispered. The footage was longer than the copy I'd seen before. Near the end, something new. Robert bending to pick up a glinting metal object from the driveway. When I zoomed in, my stomach turned. It was my house key. He hadn't just chased Sarah that night. He'd come back, entered my home, hours before I even knew my daughter had been attacked. That detail changed everything. It proved premeditation, an intent to invade, not a family dispute. I clenched the USB in my palm. Once again, it was a quiet woman who had handed me the next piece of justice. That night, I copied the video, labeling it evidence_K, Vega footage full. 3 encrypted versions, one for Ellison, one for Rosales, one for my own safe. I'd seen too many lost files in my lifetime. Not this time. Just as I finished, the phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer, just pressed record. A man's voice filled the voicemail, low and weary. I used to work for him. I've got files. If you want them, come to the old pawn shop at 2 a.m., alone. I traced the voice through my audio software, 90% match to Kyle Brenner, a former employee of Robert's. Convicted once for possession, released after Robert posted bail, now apparently afraid. I decided I'd go, not because I trusted him, but because every fragment of truth counts. At 2 a.m., I reached the west side, the abandoned pawn shop. The metal gate half down, sign rusted, moonlight dripping through broken glass. Inside, dust, whiskey, rot. Behind the counter sat a sealed envelope. No one there. I opened it carefully. Inside were bank statements, 8 transfers totaling $42,000 from RM Enterprises to Denise Salgado. The first memo line read, Land papers, 47A. Not just forgery, they'd paid for the crime. I photographed each page and bagged the envelope, then headlights sliced through the crack under the door. A muffled sound behind me. Instinct took over. I ducked behind the counter. The door creaked open. Broad shoulders. Not Robert. Hector Valdivia. Robert's lawyer. Phone in hand, flashlight sweeping the floor. Kyle? He hissed. Kyle? No answer. He stepped deeper, scanning the room, until he noticed the missing envelope. His eyes changed. He knew. He turned fast and left, slamming the door behind him. The truck engine roared away. I exhaled, still crouched in the dark. The whole thing captured on my body cam. Back home by 3:12 a.m., I uploaded the footage. Valdivia's face, the timestamp, the license plate, clear as day. I labeled it Evidence_L, Valdivia at scene. The list on my screen grew, line after line, the spine of truth. Evidence A, medical records. Evidence F, arrest footage. Evidence G, forged deed. Evidence J, bank transfers. Evidence K, Vega footage. Evidence L, Valdivia at scene. Every file, every letter, a steady heartbeat, cold, precise. By sunrise, I was in Rosales' office. The smell of coffee and new paper hung in the air. He listened quietly as I laid out the timeline, eyes fixed on the screen. When I handed him the final USB, he nodded once. No words, just the look of a man who understood. Enough, his eyes said. On the way home, my phone buzzed. A new message. Thank you. I've turned the rest in to the prosecutor. Good luck. No signature. Didn't need one. Kyle. By evening, Port Angeles had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Boats in the harbor, gulls over the water. But for me, everything had shifted. I walked the pier. The wind whipped hard, waves striking the railing, spraying salt on my face. No fear now, only clarity. Every case has its own rhythm. I'd once told my rookies, when they attack your name, don't fight with words, fight with evidence. Tonight, I was living that lesson. When I came home, the house smelled of pine and tea. Sarah was in the kitchen, pouring water into 2 mugs. Peaceful, for once. I didn't speak. I just watched her for a while, realizing something quiet but certain. Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's simply the act of continuing when the world tells you to stop. At my desk, I wrote the day's final log entry. March 11th, 2025. Public smear campaign active. Allies, Camila Vega, Kyle Brenner. Next phase, pre-trial hearing. Status, balance has shifted. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. Night had settled, the lake catching the light like a long ribbon of silver. The storm wasn't over, but this time, I wasn't fighting it alone. That morning, Port Angeles lay under a soft shroud of fog.
The road to the Clallam County Courthouse stretched quiet and long, lined with shedding maples. I drove slowly, my hands locked around the wheel. In the glove box rested a small metal case, the USB drives, photos, certificates, and 4 months of my life torn open and rebuilt into something solid. A complete structure of truth. Ahead, the courthouse rose-gray stone walls, white columns, an American flag swaying in the chill wind. I stepped out. The sea salt mixed with the cold air. People like to say justice is light, but today it was a cold, blinding light, merciless in its clarity. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back benches, cameras and recorders aimed at the defense table where Robert Mendez sat. Black suit, head slightly bowed, eyes unafraid. Beside him, Hector Valdivia, still wearing that smug lawyer's calm. I sat in the front row, with Prosecutor Rosales just ahead of me. Behind me sat Sarah, pale gray blouse, hair pulled back, clutching a small notebook. Every time I glanced at her, I saw that morning she trembled on the hospital bed, and it steadied me. The gavel struck. Valdivia spoke first, long, deliberate, claiming there was no direct evidence, dismissing every piece of data as a mother's obsession from her years in law enforcement. I didn't interrupt. I wrote down every word. In my world, words are noise. Truth lives in structure. Then Rosales rose. The air shifted. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened his laptop and projected the first video. Camila Vega's footage filled the screen. Sarah running through rain, Robert chasing her. Headlights swept across his face, clear, undeniable. The room fell still. Next, the forged deed to parcel 47A. My signature, Sarah's signature, both proven false. Followed by the bank transfer to Denise Salgado's account. Someone in the press row exhaled sharply. Robert's jaw tightened. Then, the final clip. The footage from my porch camera. Robert forcing the door open, a knife glinting in his hand. A shout, "Police! Hands up!" The click of handcuffs. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something real behind his eyes. Fear. When Rosales finished, the room buzzed. Hector leapt up, shouting about manipulated footage, trying to summon Denise as a witness. But the witness chair was empty. Until the courtroom doors opened. The sharp echo of heels on tile. Denise Salgado entered, hair tied back, no makeup, envelope in hand. No one called her, but she walked straight to the front. The judge nodded once. She handed the envelope to the clerk. Inside, a USB. A recorded conversation between her and Robert after his release. Robert's voice filled the courtroom. "If I go down, you go down. Stay quiet. That land's worth more than anyone." Silence. No cross-examination, no argument needed. Rosales didn't even speak. He didn't have to. Robert lowered his head. Hector's pen slipped from his hand, his face drained white. There was nothing left to save. I inhaled slowly, hearing my father's voice again in memory. Truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to stand. Judge Monroe delivered the verdict, his tone calm and absolute. Defendant Robert Mendez is found guilty of aggravated assault, unlawful entry, document forgery, and property fraud. Sentence, 25 years imprisonment, without parole. No cheers, no applause. Just the shuffle of papers and the scrape of a pen signing the order. Robert turned once toward me. His eyes were empty. No rage, no denial. Just the hollow recognition of a man watching his own power dissolve. I didn't look away. I'd seen that look before. The moment a man finally meets the law he thought he was above. Outside, sunlight broke through the fog for the first time.
Sarah stood beside me without a word. I could hear shutters clicking, reporters calling out, the salt wind whipping against the courthouse steps, but in that moment, the noise faded. On the stone wall behind us, the old inscription caught the light. In truth, we trust. 4 words, cold as steel, but in them, I found warmth again. That afternoon, I returned home. The little house, windows open, light pouring across the wooden floor. I placed the metal evidence box on the table. I didn't need it anymore, but I couldn't throw it away. Inside lay the entire structure that had built justice. I opened the lid and lifted the first page I'd signed months ago. Case_Sarah_ZUR1, Evidence A, Medical Record. The edges were creased, coffee-stained, trembling from the night I'd written it. Every mark, every note, a memory of the fight no one should ever have to wage. I closed the box and locked it away. Near dusk, Camilla came by, carrying a bouquet of lavender. She set it on the table without a word. I smiled, and we sat together. 2 older women, silent over tea, listening to the waves outside. And I realized justice doesn't come from a badge, a courtroom, or a sentence. It comes from the people who open their doors when others are too afraid. Camilla, Sarah, and everyone who still believes truth is worth protecting. Night fell. I opened the window. The wind carried the distant bell from the lighthouse. I stood there for a long time, watching my reflection on the glass. No longer the hardened chief, just a mother who had saved her daughter. And herself. I took up my notebook and wrote the final entry. March 15th, 2025. Case closed. Defendant sentenced to 25 years. Justice does not bring peace, but it clears a path for truth to breathe. I closed the book and set the pen down. The porch light flickered once, reflecting softly through the window, small but steady. Below, the sea murmured, and within me, there was only the quiet stillness of a woman who had walked through the storm and found, at last, the calm that follows truth. Spring returned to Port Angeles. The gray rain had finally lifted. Along the bay, the wind carried salt and the scent of lavender blooming beside the path that led down to the sea. My small house was full of light now, windows open, walls freshly painted white, the old wooden table polished smooth. No more desperate knocks at the door. No more flashing patrol lights at 2 a.m. Only stillness. The stillness of those who have survived the storm and stayed standing. I had officially retired from the force after the trial. No badge, no nameplate, just a small notebook where I documented every step of that long battle. The evidence, the hearings, the wounds that justice had to pass through to be seen. On its cover, I wrote 4 words: silence does not feed justice. Sarah was healing slowly but surely. She'd begun tending the garden, replanting the apple tree her father once loved. Each morning, I watched her water it, sunlight catching in her dark hair, and I understood. Justice doesn't live only inside a courtroom. It grows in every breath, every motion, every blossom that dares to bloom after a brutal winter. One morning, a letter arrived from the Clallam County Prosecutor's Office. Inside was a certified copy of the final sentencing with a handwritten note from Rosales. This case has become the model for the Silent No More program. Thank you. I folded the letter and smiled faintly. I no longer cared for the word victory. All that mattered was saving Sarah, and saving what was left of myself. These days, I spend my mornings writing procedural guides for the Vega Arriaga Foundation, a small nonprofit for survivors of abuse, named for me and my neighbor Camila Vega, the woman who first handed me the footage that changed everything.
I wrote down what the manuals never teach: how to structure evidence, follow the law, collect truth without losing one's soul. Each line was born of years spent on the border between fear, duty, and clarity. Truth, I've learned, needs structure, not volume, and to protect others, sometimes all it takes is a heart that refuses to stay quiet. Every afternoon, Camila visits with warm cornbread and a gentle laugh. Sarah has started talking more. Sometimes she laughs out loud. The sound fills the kitchen again, bouncing off the white walls, and I realize justice doesn't always live in verdicts. Sometimes it lives in the ability to sit together in peace after all that's been broken. On the shelf, the metal evidence box remains locked. I'll never burn it or display it. It's a relic, a memory of what we survived and what we protected. When I open it, the first page I see is Sarah's medical report. The ink is smudged now, but Dr. Letitia Figueroa's signature remains. I trace it gently and whisper, "Every truth, no matter how painful, deserves to be kept." Dot. One evening, I walked along the shoreline. The wind was sharp, the waves white and restless. Seagulls skimmed low, their cries raw against the open sky. Far out, the lighthouse beams swept slowly, rhythmically across the bay. Last year, that light made me flinch. I'd shrink from it, afraid of car engines and shadows from the past. Now, I lift my head. The light no longer threatens. It breathes, steady, alive, the heartbeat of truth itself. I sat on the old stone bench, poured lavender tea into a chipped porcelain cup, and let its warmth fill the air. I thought of all the women who once arrived at my doorstep in the middle of the night, silent, trembling, carrying their own invisible bruises. I thought of mothers like me, who once believed silence was protection, and I knew, at last, that silence is the weapon of the guilty. That night, I wrote the final line in my case log. Justice doesn't bring peace. It builds the path toward it. I turned off the lamp and stepped onto the porch. The sea shimmered like liquid metal under the moonlight. On the wooden fence, Sarah had hung a small sign carved with the words, "Home of Light." I looked at it, and my heart felt light as the wind. I am no longer Lieutenant Arriaga, just a mother who learned to speak and finally understood that both light and justice never stay silent. A year later, the Port Angeles case was featured in journals as a study in structured evidence. They called me the mother who brought justice back to town. I didn't finish the article. Instead, I turned on the radio each morning to hear women telling their stories on a new program called Silent No More. I recognized the sounds in the background, the pour of water into cups, the scratch of pens, the wind over a porch. No tears, no theatrics, just truth. Detail by detail, action by action. Justice had become a daily practice for people who once lived in fear. Sarah now works for the Vega Arriaga Foundation. She teaches survivors how to record, store, and preserve evidence, the same tools that once saved her. When someone calls her the daughter of light, she smiles. And I just sit in the garden, pour tea, and listen to their laughter. That's where the real victory lives. Not in courtrooms, but in the courage to tell your story without shaking. At night, I light the small lantern on the porch. Its golden glow spreads across the white wall where the sign still hangs. Home of Light. The ocean wind remains cold, but no longer lonely. I whisper like a prayer, Silence does not feed justice. It only feeds those who fear the truth. I lift my eyes to the sea. The lighthouse beam sweeps across the horizon again, slow, strong, eternal. And I know, light never stays silent. If this story touched you, tell me where you're listening from. Share it so someone out there knows they're not alone. And don't forget to like and subscribe so together we can keep the light of truth alive.